I'd like to acknowledge the wonderful people at the bottom there who helped us with the preparation of these slide decks by providing us with information. You'll notice that we've got acknowledgements at the bottom of each of our slide decks. We wanted to make sure that all those people and all those organisations were recognised for the great contributions that they've made to help us put this information together. All right, so let's have a look at the why. What is the importance of a geospatial reference system? And first of all, you see that word in bold. What is a modern geospatial reference system? To me, the word modern is talking about having a geospatial reference system, so having the geodetic datums in your country and transformation parameters in your country that are aligned with information coming from satellites. So it doesn't matter if you're using an ITRF 2005 datum. The reality is that you're using a link with your national datum is aligned with some version of ITRF, because that allows you to make sure that you're working in the same reference frame that satellites are providing information in. And I will give you a bit more information about that in a moment. What does a geospatial reference system enable? Like, how do I explain this to a politician? Well, my first advice is don't say the words geospatial reference system. We as technical people understand it, but they don't understand, and they don't need to understand it. So how do I abstract them from the complexities of what we do as scientists and explain it to them in words that they will understand, rather than forcing them to understand it the way that we think about it? And as you'll see, it's often by looking at it from the complete opposite end. You talk about the applications. You don't talk about the science behind it. We'll then go through a description of the components that make it up, and then we'll have a look at some steps that we can use to explain that to policymakers. And I've got some great examples from my friends and colleagues in Australia of how this was done for the Positioning Australia program. And some of you might have been at the March meeting that we held in Bonn, where Martine Wolf presented some of those slides, and I've got some of the information that she provided, which I think is a great way to describe that business case. So we're going to start to look at the elements that we talked about here and described here in a little bit of detail this morning. The bit that I wanted to draw your attention to here is the box at the bottom, and that is that it's not just about the technical parts that you can see the diagrams for, but also the people, standards, legal frameworks, software, technical manuals. That's all part of the system. It's not just the technical components of datums and transformation parameters. You actually need all that other stuff associated with it as well. And what you'll realize this week as you're going through the process of thinking, how am I going to do this in my country? The thing that you'll mostly realize is how you need to be starting to talk to people from other areas of your government or other areas of your organization to help you, because it's not something you can do as a technical expert on your own. You do need help from other areas. So what does it enable? If you're looking to start to think about what's my business case for having a geospatial reference system, a modern geospatial reference system in my country, you can be talking about providing accurate positioning and navigation data, and importantly, efficient positioning and navigation data, because your geospatial reference system is going to be aligned, as I said, with the same system, the same reference frame that is used by the satellites, and that is ITRF. That's what satellites work in, so that's what you want to be linked to for your national datum. That helps with data integration and consistency. By having a geospatial reference system, you can transform your old data into the current datum, so you don't lose anything as you transition to a more modern system. You can then do spatial analysis with higher accuracy, and then you can do real-time data usage as well. Here's some more examples of why it's important. If you look at the picture on the right-hand side, this is something put together by the Victorian state government a number of years ago. You can see that that's the Geodesy positioning layer is the basis for how they describe the digital transformation process that they were going through in Victoria at the time. You do see these figures sometimes, but often the Geodesy, the positioning bit is left off. They talk about data alignment, but they don't actually explain how they're doing it. It's the Geodesy, it's that positioning layer at the bottom that allows you to line up all your imagery, your roads, property, addressing, natural hazards, business locations. It's all linked through, that's the GNSS satellites at the top. If they're all aligned with a common modern datum, then all of this is lined up and allows you to make good business decisions, accurate business decisions. It actually helps governments with their day-to-day activities. And you can talk about this from those examples there on the left, whether it's the surveying industry or construction industry, industrial automation. You can talk about location-based services. Sometimes that's a really good way to talk about the benefits of geodesy to a politician. So Ryan uses this example as well. If you talk to someone who knows nothing about positioning or geodesy, that what they do understand is the blue dot. When you look at a mapping function like Google Maps, you go, oh, you ever see that blue dot? Is that we make the blue dot work. And then that's something that they understand straight away. And the example I use is how grateful are you for that blue dot on the map when you've got kids sitting in the back seat of your car screaming, I want a Happy Meal, and you need to navigate to the nearest McDonald's, right? That's something that parents can understand. So that's a great way of talking to them about the benefits of geodesy. These are social things, but they're innate. People know what that feeling feels like when you've got kids screaming in the back of the car. So you've got to come up with examples that they can understand, and that's a great way to get through to people. We already heard this morning some great examples about hazard assessment, disaster response. There's been great business cases that have been developed from people in this room around that. That works with a lot of different government agencies as well. So the Geospatial Reference System, I want you to think about it as that sort of glue that allows you to stick all this information together and help tell that story. So here's an example that you may consider to be valuable. Think about firefighting in your particular country. You might have an example where you've got that positioning layer on the bottom, you've got a roads network, you've got buildings, and on the left-hand side, you can see that might be an ambulance that's traveling at 75 kilometers an hour down a road. You can see where the buildings are. You can see where the fire has been with the burn scar, and you can see the active fire, the bright red bit. All of this would be really useful for firefighters to have that real-time remote sensing imagery, to have a GPS position of a car traveling down a road, have the roads network all aligned in the same layer with the cadastral data set. But in some countries, as we talked about, and my friends in the Pacific in particular would attest to this, is their cadastral layer might be very different to the location information system they're using for roads. And none of it might be linked with GPS or remote sensing imagery. So that becomes pretty useless when you look at information like that, doesn't it? You can't make good decisions in real time to help protect people and their livelihoods when you have a situation like this where all your data is out of alignment. When you don't have a modern geospatial reference system, this is the situation that many countries are in. And by describing this to a policymaker or a politician, you can easily explain to them how you're not really in a position to be helping people when they need it the most. So we'll start by looking at this static component. And as I touched on, there's an example of the coordinate reference frame as that base layer. So this is a way of describing the importance of geodesy to people who might be politicians or don't really understand what it is. Make sure that layer's at the bottom. In this example, I had to draw that diagram. All the other layers were there, but the coordinate reference frame wasn't sitting at the bottom of that. I had to create that myself. We shouldn't be having to create that diagram. That's not how it should be. We then have transformation parameters. So how do I get the data that might be in my old local system into a new static datum? And we have specific presentations that are talking about that. We had a great presentation and great discussion on this with our friends in Africa. And one of the biggest problems they had there where they're using old local spheroids. And in some cases, they don't have enough data in the old datum. Like they may not have a height above the spheroid, which means they're not in a position to create the transformation parameters to get from the old datum to the new datum and the challenges associated with that. And I know this might be a topic of conversation that we have to have with this group as well. So with transformation parameters, for those of you who don't know what it is, it's about how do I move from an old datum to a new datum? And the transformation parameters are effectively saying from, if you look at the picture on the right-hand side there, you might have your old datum might be the one down towards the bottom right, which is your old system. And there's going to be an offset to the rotation into the new system, or the ellipsoid in the new system. So the circle at the center point of these represents the center of your reference frame. And if you can try and imagine an ellipse that runs around the outside of those three axes, you can imagine you've got these two different models of the Earth, and they're different in terms of where the center point is, which is the center of your reference frame. And then they're different in terms of the rotation. So they're actually aligned differently. And we've obviously exaggerated the offsets here. In some cases, these are very small differences. And in other cases where you've used like a local spheroid or ellipsoid in your country, the offsets could be quite significant. So you have these 7 parameters that allow you to move the translation, which is how do I move one center point of a reference frame to another center point of a reference frame. I need to calculate those. I then need to calculate how they're rotated differently in all 3 axes. And then I need to deal with the scale difference. So is the size of that reference frame different in between my 2 systems? And we'll look at some real world examples that explain this in more detail. But those 7 parameters effectively allow you to transform from one reference frame to another. And we'll look at how you can create those. Importantly, using, we say, a sufficient number of points from both data sets. We then look at the time-dependent component that I mentioned before. So I'd just be interested in a quick show of hands. Is there anyone who's using WGS84 as their national datum at the moment, or a hub datum to collect data and use data in your countries? Yeah, you're using WGS84? Yeah. The old one is. Okay, so wow, you've got a complicated one. Okay, so you're using your old static datum is not a static datum. It's a time-dependent datum. Okay, that's going to be fun to work on. I'm looking forward to that. So that's a real challenge, right? Because if that's the case, if you're using WGS84 as your current datum, but you want to move to using a new static datum in your country, it's relatively easy to develop the transformation parameters. That's not the hard part. The hard part is really in dealing with your data sets, because you need to know when was that data set collected. So if you had a road network, for example, and you collected all the information in WGS84, it would depend on what year you collected that data about where that data set is. So if you did that in Australia, Australia's moving it at 7 centimeters a year. So you would have a road network that was collected, but you need to account for that plate movement. So how much does the continental plate move, or how much movement do you get in Philippines? 2 to 3? 2 to 3 centimeters. Yeah, okay. That would vary, that's right. And have you collected when that information was captured or not? Okay, so if you have that, you can model it, and there might be bigger uncertainties in some of the way that you deal with it, but I think that's going to be a really interesting use case to work through of how you can move towards a modern datum. So that's an example where we need to keep in mind that WGS84 is a time-dependent reference frame. When you put a number on the end like 84, everyone thinks it's a static datum. Well, it's not. And that can be, and ITRF is similar. People don't realize it's a time-dependent reference frame. So we need to account for movement of the continental plates over time. Victor.
So for many countries, originally they will have their own datum for cadastral survey. So cadastral surveys datum may not be homogeneous across the whole country. If your country is big, even small countries also may not be homogeneous. So the question is, how do you deal with transforming from a non-homogeneous datum to EC, EG, type of datum. I think that's one question that a lot of people still struggle with. That's the reason why cadastral survey is very hard to move to a homogeneous reference system.
Yeah, can I dig into that a little bit? When you say non-homogeneous, do you mean that there might be a lot of different local datums that are used?
Yes,
and there might be different local datum in each region or something like that?
So for cadastral survey, usually it's localized. You want it to be good and tight in that in that place. And when you look across the whole country, usually that datum is not homogeneous across the country.
Okay, that's good. And we can work on that when we talk about get into the details of transformations. Again, it's a specialized case, but it is something that we can work on. It's just putting in extra steps to get everything onto something that's common and then do a transformation. But we can work on that as an example. I think that'd be a great idea. Thanks. So here's, and we'll see that our region, the Asia Pacific region, is at the center of this map. And this is put together by Zahir El-Tamimi, looking at the velocity field. And you can see how complex, and I mean, many of you know how complex the Asia Pacific region is when it comes to plate tectonics. And you see the velocities of the GNSS sites here. As I mentioned, Australia about 7 centimeters per year. But then you get these very different magnitudes and vectors pointing in different regions, particularly from New Zealand. And then as we move up through that ring of fire around to the Asian region, it's extremely complex with many microplates as well. So this gets into the real reason that we have a regional reference frame and a time-dependent regional reference frame. And we'll be talking about the differences between how it's handled in the Asia Pacific region compared to how it's done in Europe, for example, and why they're very different use cases. Anyone who is currently looking to modernize their geospatial reference system, you will be eternally grateful once you've seen the APREF presentation that Basara is going to present, because you have a very good regional network here that you can link to that's going to give you a lot of great information to help get you started. And then we look at the height components, and this is where I'm very fortunate to have my good friend and colleague here, Jack McCubbin, who's going to be presenting on some of the work around geoid model development and how to develop height datums for your countries. Jack's done a great job at doing that across Australia. He was also heavily involved in New Zealand as well. So we'll have some presentations from him on Wednesday, looking at how to do this from a regional perspective or a national perspective, and what kind of data sets you need. Not to put too much pressure on Jack, there's no way you can cover everything that you need to do for this in a short session that we have, but I'm hoping it's going to give you a good idea on how to get these things started. Importantly, as Avit mentioned as well, he's going to give us a presentation on joining land and sea and how the important role that the geoid plays in allowing us to align data sets onshore and offshore. As I mentioned, the standards and software, again, it's a critical component. It's not always the most exciting component. It's not sexy at all when it comes to talking about standards. A lot of people can find it quite boring, but it's necessary. And if you get that right, it actually allows your users to do things very easily. So I'll give you an example of things like the ISO Geodetic Register, where you can have your information about your country. These are the authoritative datum parameters or transformation parameters, getting them recognized in things like an ISO Geodetic Register or the EPSG register, which is used for a lot of software development. If you put the right information into those repositories, it makes the life of your users so much easier. And hopefully you get less questions about implementation issues which might occur. So we've got some discussions on that, and there'll be a few topics on that. Also with laws and regulations, there is information that we're going to talk to you about this week. This is getting into the governance and the need to have laws or regulations in your country that talk about how data is used. Again, this might not be your specialization. You may not be interested in these components, but you need to find someone who is. Coming back to Victor, Victor plays an important role doing this within Singapore. But if you don't have these things set up and you don't have those regulations set up in your country, then it's not going to get adopted, and you're probably not going to get the support that you need from governments to go and modernize these things over time. Importantly, people and the capacity development challenges that I think we've heard a few times this morning that we all face. None of this happens without people. So how can we make sure we're supporting the people in our teams and developing that capacity for the future as well? So I'm hoping that this week will be a great start to you develop those networks with other people from your region as well. It's important to remember this as well. This is not a new idea. We've been upgrading geospatial reference systems for centuries, and they always get upgraded for a reason. So this is important when you're coming back to talking to your politicians. You're not talking about trying to do something new. And the reason that we upgrade it is always based on a why. What is the need of the stakeholder? Over time, we've seen geospatial reference systems change for a whole range of reasons. If you look back to scientific exploration, or whether it was mapping of country boundaries, military applications, or the advent and introduction of satellite positioning, there's always a need, there's always a why as to why you change it. And you've heard me say a couple of times already, being able to capitalize on the efficient and effective use of satellite positioning, remote sensing, it would be crazy not to have a datum that is aligned with satellite positioning systems or remote sensing data at the moment, because most of it is free and easily accessible and helps your decision making. So that's if your government is using anything related to satellite positioning data or satellite remote sensing data, that's a great use case of why you're saying you're trying to modernize your geospatial reference system, because it allows them to use all the applications that they want and align their data sets more accurately. So here's an example that I mentioned before. This came from Martine Wolf at Geoscience Australia, and these are a few slides here on how this story was told in Australia. And they talked about an integrated national positioning capability. All right, so far I haven't said anything about a geospatial reference system, right? I'm talking about positioning. That's what politicians can understand. And they like the word integrated because it shows that you're trying to do things and bring it together. We're going to accelerate the adoption and development of location-based technology and applications. In politician speak, that means we're going to find new revenue sources to pay tax in Australia. These are the stories that you need to be telling. I'm trying to solve your problem. I'm going to bring things together, give you a national capability, and you're going to get more tax revenue. So far, it looks like I'm trying to help them. I'm not asking for anything, right? Put yourself in the positions of the politicians or policymakers you're trying to influence. That tells a story that they're already interested in. As a result of, I'm not jumping right to the end, but as you can see, this was quite a successful process. It wasn't just from one slide that they got that $1.4 billion, but telling a simple narrative did help. And it's led to a big investment in positioning over the next 20 years in Australia through satellite-based technology, ground observatories, the development of open source GNSS analysis, and importantly, to support the operations and the people who do this work. Right, so how did they do it? Well, they used some examples. They talked about the impacts that it's going to have for the road and transport sector. They talked about, cooperative intelligent transport systems, driverless cars that are coming online, autonomous driving, 3D digital mapping projects that states were already working on within the country, vehicle speed determination for regulatory applications. This is about, can you be monitoring the speed and the locations of people to help with things like real-time road pricing in the future? Again, tax, revenue, money coming in for the government. This was one of my favorite examples. They had this situation where with the aviation sector, they didn't focus on talking about landing planes in Sydney or Melbourne Airport, but regional locations in Australia where, for example, planes like the Royal Flying Doctor Service were unable to get in and land safely in particular conditions due to cloud or fog, whatever it might have been, which actually meant they were unable to go and land when someone needed emergency assistance. By having a stronger satellite-based augmentation system, which is a high integrity signal coming from space. It allowed planes to then descend through that fog or through that cloud and actually land and help people who had health emergencies. That's a great story that talks about the social benefits of what you can do with precise positioning. Similar to road with rail, they're looking at advanced train management systems, being able to attach things to the front of the trains and do track surveys, as well as providing safer travel systems. The construction industry, personal safety, the one that I love the most was they had these GPS buzzers in the tops of the helmets, so that if you got too close to certain trucks through virtual fencing, based on positioning, someone could be alerted that they might be entering into a dangerous area. It also helps with the integration of different information. So if you collect LiDAR surveys or total station surveys, you could align that with GPS information and improve the accuracy and efficiency with which you can do construction. UAV aviation. This one wasn't as exciting as the other one I used to like, where they were talking about coffee delivery or donut delivery. That's what I like the most. But this is probably a high-spec drone that's helping with agriculture and forestry, for example. Again, collecting different data sets and integrating them in a really quick and easy way. This was an example, and you might laugh, this was the example that our minister cared the most about, because he was the minister in a rural region of Australia, and he was interested in virtual fencing and the health and safety of cattle. So the cattle could be tracked, and based on the movements of the cattle, they could determine whether or not the cattle were healthy or in the right location. And for him and his constituents, this was massive. This was a really strong selling point. So you need, as I said, you need to understand, what is it that my policymaker cares about? It's going to be different for everybody. So it's great to have a whole range of different scenarios, but in this case, it was a wonderful example that we could talk in a language that he could understand. Mining, that's another big one for Australia, the mining industry. I mentioned the virtual fencing. They had autonomous trucks, autonomous rail. In some cases, there's mine sites that are predominantly run out of a headquarters in Perth with no one driving the trucks or the trains. A lot of these mine sites are semi-autonomous nowadays, which is astounding. But you also see the efficiencies that come from something like that. That only comes through having very, very good positioning technology. Also, assistance for blind people. You think about having blind people having some sort of audio link that can connect them with where they are and feeding them information about what's happening around them, or people who are visually impaired. They can get guidance through things like heads-up display on glasses. So there were some scenarios that were tested to determine how helpful this would be for people who are visually impaired, to help them. Also things like parcel delivery, that, as we've seen, understanding congestion, understanding fleet movements, all of that information is critical nowadays, and also business cases that politicians can understand. There's one port in Australia called Port Hedland. You can see that dot point in the middle there, where they worked out that for every extra 10 centimeters of under keel clearance they could get, so this much clearance underneath the bottom of the ship, meant $200 million a year of iron ore exports. That's a massive amount of money from one port, just by being able to monitor things slightly better. So you can imagine what it's like throughout the rest of Australia. So if we're going to talk to government about the benefits of what we can provide with precise positioning technology, if you can demonstrate an extra $200 million a year from one port, imagine what that's like around the rest of the coastline. So this is where it goes to me saying you need to understand what are the big business cases, what are the big drivers in your country. As you can see here, this is another application of mining linked with the maritime. I've brought up agriculture. They're two of the biggest industries in Australia. They might not be the ones that are yours, but if you can find out what they are and connect with those people, get some use cases and scenarios like this, the investment in precise positioning pays for itself very quickly. You can demonstrate that cost-benefit analysis back to your governments very, very quickly. So there's some further reading here. that I've given you and some examples of where those industry case studies are described in more detail. Also, the economics benefit study that has been led by Geoscience Australia. And the one that I've got at the bottom is the USPA market report. This comes out of the EU, and they do a market report every 2 years looking at the financial benefits and cost benefit analysis of investment in GNSS and Earth observation. They have about 16 different industries there where they don't just provide the global benefits, but they talk about the regional benefits. So you might be able to find the stuff from the Asia Pacific region, and you can use that as a starting point for some of your business case development. And we'll have a chance to look at that in more detail later in the week. Ryan runs us through a great session where we get you to think about the specific examples that might be relevant in your country. All right, so we'll stop there. I'm going to jump across to the next presentation. Just before I do, though, please be welcome anyone to raise their hand if you've got any questions or comments about that one. Yeah, Richard, thanks. Just use your
earlier discussions about WGS84 being used as a datum. You know, I know a lot of people will use AusPos, which is a fantastic service, or similar services, and they use that as a datum for a particular project they're working on or a survey they're working on. And of course, that tectonics is a bit of an issue if they're integrating data over a long period of time. But perhaps a more sinister aspect of that is that a base station they use, they'll assign coordinates to it from AusPos, and they'll use those coordinates for several years. So it's not just a matter of actually like getting a date of the survey and aligning it using a model. That's actually like working out what the origin of that survey was. So there's actually, you know, it's a bit muddier than a straightforward transformation. Sorry. Yep. Sorry.
Yeah, and this is what we were touching on with our friends from the Philippines. I think you got to know when that data set was collected, and that's the critical part in performing that transformation. That's right. Metadata. Yeah. Any other quick? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Indonesia has already mentioned about the semi-dynamic datum. So, but Indonesia is not leading the way that much, like you mentioned. So we still trial and error. So we updated regularly the coordinate of our core station. There is maybe we declared in 2013 for the first coordinate, and then we already updated in 2021. Yeah, right. So we our question is about the software from the FSG register. So we already registered to the FSG, but I think in FSG just support the static datum. I don't know about to register about the semi-dynamic datum about the coordinate updated. Is it have to be another batch of the updated coordinates or something like that, or what? And for the other question is for the private sector that you mentioned about the business model, like the agriculture, like the mining section. They already maintain their GNSS network for their own. And then they maintain for their own, they operate for their itself for this, but not regularly updated in the our datum. We have a national datum SRGI and correlate with the WGS at 84. But for the private sector that are not integrated into our station, our BIG stations, they are just make their station is just by their own. So how to integrate it like their private sector? Thank you.
I may not have time to answer both those now, but I think we'll get an opportunity throughout the week, because if I can focus on one particular thing there, you'll realize that the bit that you're concerned about, to me, they're not technical issues, that they are communications issues. And so the first one, for example, the work on the ISO, is it semi-dynamic or dynamic or time dependent? To me, it comes down to just providing enough metadata. And I think you can do that within the ISO Geodetic register, I think you probably wouldn't introduce a new datum. It wouldn't be classified as a new datum because it's an update of the coordinate set in the existing datum. I may need to understand things a little bit better, but if you're not changing any of the parameters, like you're not updating the ITRF realization that you're using as the foundation, or you're not changing the datum defining stations, it probably doesn't classify as a new datum. It's a new coordinate set in the same datum. And so I think all you would need to do in the Geodetic register is have a pointer or a link that takes you to maybe your government website where the updated coordinate set is. That would be sufficient, I think. And as long as there's enough metadata and information there, then the user can handle those challenges. On the other one, we'll come back to that during the week to talk about when do we need to be engaging with industry to make sure that they're using the same system that we're using. It's a good question. Victor. And then, sorry, is there one down here as well? Is that you, Andrew? Yeah, I'll go Victor and then I'll go Andrew.
Very fast. So is the use of term, this is a communication question. I noticed that I don't know whether it's loosely used, but you use Geospatial Reference System, but some part also we use Geodetic Reference Infrastructure. So Geodetic and Geospatial obviously are two different terms. I think in terms of communication, there could be some issue, and whether are we going to address that? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't think there's a simple answer. What I would advise you to do is call it whatever your government is interested in. Some governments love, and it's because it doesn't really matter, right? Whether I'm talking about a system of things here, but this is not how I would describe it to your minister if they came in the room, because they don't know what a system is. It's weird, and we use it deliberately because I'm showing it includes people, it includes capacity development, it includes VLBI stations, it includes SLR, it includes GNSS, it includes everything. And because this week we want to talk about how those things fit together and work together. But when your minister comes in, they don't need to understand everything. In your case, you might be saying, we want to improve the infrastructure around the ports in Singapore so that we can have the shipping industry operate more efficiently and accurately and protect people's livelihoods. That might be the story you tell. And they may love the word infrastructure. So use the word infrastructure. But to some people, infrastructure means concrete. And so I don't like using the word infrastructure when I'm talking about the whole thing, because then people feel left out. So it really comes down to the story that you want to tell, I think. So don't feel wedded to using one word or another word. My theory is, and what I encourage my team to do in the GGCE, is when you don't feel like you've got to coin a term for everything. Use more words. Don't use less words. Actually tell people what is the impact of what you're trying to do. Don't try and describe it in 3 words and expect someone else to understand it.
Sorry, just to clarify, my concern is between geodesy and geospatial and not infrastructure and system.
Yeah, so what does your minister understand? They probably don't understand either, so it doesn't matter. I would say don't use either. Yeah, to me, I like using the word geospatial because we're part of the UN, right? And it's part of the Global Geospatial Information Management. A lot of what we're trying to do is to support all the work that's done within the geospatial community. But when I talk to the Internet Governance Forum, or I'm talking to the minister from Norway, I don't use either word. I'm talking about the application that they care about. If we eventually get back to talking about something that's technical, I'll explain to them what that concept means. But it's only if they have driven that conversation down to that level of detail. And it's only 1 in 10 ministers that will ever get to that level of detail. So my advice, don't worry about the words and try not to use the words. By the end of this week, I want you talking about applications, not about the foundations. Andrew?
Thanks, Victor. I think there was a question which actually I wanted to ask about the technology, which you mentioned about SPAS, and which Geoscience Australia is, have a project called SouthMed, and they are using this GNSS application, precise point positioning. So with this technology and coming up in near future, how will we can relate geodesy or geodetic surveys using the triple P technology? That's my question. Is again, I think we are moving away from the term geodetic to geospatial, being inclusive. And that's where I was looking at. And then if we are talking about vertical reference frame, how will the triple P complement the vertical reference frame when we want to measure the sea level rise or sea level changes? So something around that. Yeah, so that's what I was looking at and understanding too from your presentation. The second question was that is when you showed the land velocity model map, it's quite nice. But if you see the Pacific plate, there's a lack of data for the Pacific Island countries. And if you see the small island developing states, you hardly can see them because they're quite small. You know, atolls like Funafuti, they're like 10-kilometer grid. Tarawa is like 30 kilometer. So you're looking at that, and when you want to measure land velocity, why we are not able to show that or for the countries on that map too as well. So I know that from the APR campaign, we have some data for Vanuatu, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and Solomons maybe, but Pacific is not there. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great point. And yeah, I'd encourage those of you who are here from the Pacific to be talking with Andric this week. He's in a new role now within Secretariat of the Pacific Community, looking at how to help countries with this. And this is a role that Andric's been doing almost in his spare time for a number of years, but now he's actually going to get paid to do it, which I think is fantastic. It's supported through an Australian aid and New Zealand aid program of work looking at climate change within the Pacific region, and Andric's going to be focused on how to help countries in the Pacific develop new datums and work on these systems. So yeah, my advice, have a chat with Andric during the week if you haven't met him already. Thank you.